I've mixed hundreds of metal tracks for self-recording bands, and when the bass comes in wrong, and it often does, it's almost always one of the same three problems, every single time. The first one doesn't show up all the time, maybe 1 in 5 projects, but when it does, it's immediately obvious. The bass player tracked their DI with absolutely no high end. You open up the session, pull up the DI track, and it looks like they recorded with a blanket over the instrument. What I think is happening is the bass player is being thoughtful about their tone. It's a bass. It lives in the low end. So they roll the tone knob back before tracking, thinking they want a warm and full sound. The logic makes sense on the surface, but it absolutely kills the mix. Here's why. Your amp sim, whatever you're running, Neural DSP, Tone Hub, Darkglass Ultra, it's not creating definition out of thin air. That information going into the amp sim determines what comes out. When you feed a signal with nothing above 2K, it has nothing to work with in the upper mid-range. No pick attack, no string definition, no harmonic content. Just a blurry low-end blob that's going to disappear the second down-tuned guitars come in. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so I got 2 bass DI tracks here. This top one was recorded with the tone knob all the way down, and this bottom one was recorded with the tone knob all the way up. Let's just check out what they sound like by themselves first. So we'll listen to the one with the tone knob all the way down first. So really dark, really can't hear much coming out of there. Let's compare that to a bass DI where the tone knob was turned all the way up. Crazy, crazy difference there. So with the tone knob up, you could hear the note definition. You could actually hear the notes he's playing, and it's just a much brighter sound, sharper sound. Let's take it a step further. Let's do a spec analysis of the two so you could really see just how different these tones are. Let's pull up isotone here, and let's take a snapshot first of the bass DI with the tone knob all the way down. So you can see there's like nothing of 300 hertz on that bass DI. Let's compare that now to the one with the tone knob up. Let's take a snapshot of that one. Crazy difference here. I mean, look at all that additional high end on that DI. And that right there, that's all your pick attack. That's your note definition. That's completely missing from that DI. But now let's see how these sound through an amp sim. I'm going to run both of these through just the Trivium bass knob, just the default setting it loads with. Let's check out that DI with the tone knob down. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, I'm going to call that Fart City because that's basically what it sounds like. That's just a woofy, farty bass tone. There's no definition there. Now, with the exact same settings, through the same exact amp sim, let's see what the tone sounds like with the DI where the tone knob's all the way up. And obviously, that sounds just way better. So much more pick attack, so much more aggression. That's what you want out of a bass tone for a metal song. Now, this may actually sound a little bit too bright, but it's much easier to remove frequencies from the tone and make it still sound natural than trying to add it back in when you haven't recorded it in the first place. Let me demonstrate that. So let's look at that bass DI with the tone knob all the way down. Let's add an EQ before the amp. And let's see if bringing in or trying to add those missing high-end frequencies, what that does to the tone. So I'm going to put a high shelf. Let's just see what it sounds like when we start to boost frequency. Even with an 18 dB boost at 80 hertz, I'm basically trying to boost everything. You get a little bit more note definition, but it basically just sounds like a brighter farty sound now. I mean, compare that, all that additional high end we tried to add to just the straight up tone of the bass that had the tone knob up. Look, I didn't touch anything here. Listen to the difference. That compared to this, even with the boost. absolutely no comparison there. But, like I said, if you're finding this tone too bright, you'll see how we could add an EQ on the DI with this and remove some frequencies, and it'll sound way more natural. So we're going to do the same thing with a high shelf, but this time we're going to lower the frequencies, and check out how this sounds. Even going extreme with a negative 18 dB shelf at 164 Hz, so I'm trying to take everything out of the bass DI, even that sounds better and has more tone to it than the DI that was recorded with the tone knob down. So you can see it's much better to record with a brighter bass tone, and worst case scenario, if you're not liking it, you could take some of that away, than tracking with no high end on your bass and being stuck with that tone. Mistake number 2 has nothing to do with your gear and everything to do with how the song actually is written. This one's more common than you think, and most bands are completely blind to it. The bass is either mirroring the guitars note for note for the entire song, or worse, it's trying to mirror the guitars, but actually playing the wrong notes. Let me deal with the first issue. When the bass doubles the guitar riff exactly, same notes, same rhythm, every single bar, you'd think it'd make the low end sound massive. More notes in the same register, more weight, right? But it can actually do the opposite. What you get is a frequency pileup. The bass and guitars are fighting for the same sonic space all the time. The bass loses its identity completely. Instead of sounding like a bass and guitars, it just sounds like heavier, muddier guitars. The low end has no movement, no personality. It just sits there. Great metal bass arrangements give the bass its own voice. It locks with the kick on certain hits. It anticipates a chord change. It moves around the root notes in a way that adds energy instead of just doubling what's already there. That's what makes a mix feel three-dimensional instead of flat. Now, the second issue is even more painful. Wrong notes. I've received projects where the band genuinely did not know the bass player was playing wrong notes on certain sections. Not sloppy timing, actually playing a note that doesn't belong in the key. Maybe it's a half step above or below what the guitars are playing. And here's the problem. No amount of EQ, no parallel processing, no mix trick on the planet fixes a wrong note. And tuning could only go so far with a bass. That harmonic clash lives in the recording forever. It has to go back. I'm not saying that to embarrass anyone. It happens. But if you're self-recording, you need to solo the bass before you commit to a mix. Follow along with the guitars and verify that every note is where it's supposed to be. A 10-minute check before mixing will save you hours of chasing a problem you can never actually solve. All right, mistake number 3. And this one, again, isn't a gear problem. It's a performance problem. And that makes it harder to hear. Sloppy performances, inconsistent pick attack, timing that drifts against the kick drum, dead notes, fret buzz, notes that don't fully ring out. Things you might not catch when you're listening back casually after tracking, but the second they go through compression in a mix, every single one of those issues gets amplified. Let me show you what inconsistent playing looks like. So now I've got a bass that was played very inconsistently. You could see it in the DI waveform. You can see there's peaks, valleys, just very, very inconsistent. Let's check out what that DI sounds like. So not only do you notice the differences in volumes from when it's being picked harder, the bass, compared to softer, but there's also a tonality shift. You know, when you pick harder, it's going to have a different tone than when you pick lightly. So we could try and address some of this by adding a compressor to at least even out the volume. So let's see what that sounds like now with the compressor on. So you can notice that the compressor is actually doing a very good job of evening out the volume. It sounds pretty consistent, but you may have noticed that you could almost notice some of the pumping on the compressor on those hardest hits. But more importantly than that, the compressor, even though it's evening out the volume, it's not addressing those tonality differences. When the bass is being picked harder, it still sounds very different than when it's picked softly. And there's no way to correct for that. That's baked into the sound. That's why it's important to take the time to track things properly, get a consistent take, because that pick attack is one of the most important things for shaping your overall bass tone. So let's play that again one more time, and I'll just focus on how, even though the compressor is working and keeping the volume even, how every time it hits a peak, the tone of the bass still sounds different. The volume sounding even, but the tone is still very inconsistent, even with heavy compression. Now, as for timing issues, when you've got a tight programmed drum track or a well-edited live kit, a bass that drifts even slightly against the kick creates this loose, unsteady feeling in the low end. You can feel it even when you can't specifically name it. The mix loses its punch, it loses that locked-in physical impact that metal is supposed to have. So what's the solution? It's not just recording another take and hoping for the best. Practice the part to a click until it's airtight. Record at a tempo you're actually comfortable at. And do not be afraid to punch in on the sections that need it. I'd rather spend 2 hours retracking a bass part than spend 2 hours trying to make an untrackable performance work in a mix session. One of those 2 hours produces an actual result. The bass is the foundation of your mix. If the foundation is shaky, everything built on top of it is shaky too. So, 3 mistakes killing your metal bass in the mix. First, track with your tone knob up. Give your amp sim a full spectrum signal to work with. Second, check your arrangement. The bass should have its own voice and every note needs to be the right note. Third, nail the performance before you commit to a mix. A compressor is not a timing fixer. If this video helped you out, hit the like button and subscribe. I put out content like this regularly. And if you want to go deeper on the recording side, I've got a free bass and guitar recording guide linked in the description. And if you're a self-recording band looking to get a professional mix, check out my mixing services, also in the description. And let me know in the comments, which one of these 3 mistakes have you caught yourself making? I read every single one. And if you want to see exactly how I dial in and mix a bass from scratch, start to finish, that video is right over here. Now go make your bass sound massive.